Kings and queens, welcome back to the channel, to DBD News. I hope you are all having a fantastic day. We have a lot of things to talk to you guys about today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into everything. Our first story of the day comes from Dead by Daylight themselves. They have released the Devotion picture, essentially, a little tease essentially of what the Archives Tome 11 is going to look like. And we spoke about this before, talking about the characters that are going to be featured on this. And as we can see on screen, we got Victor, we got Charlotte, we got Jonah on there. And an interesting note, we don't have the Observer. Normally we have the Observer that is featured in the middle of these tomes, and he has his hand out, and he has his, what is it, the Oculus, and he's basically looking into everyone's stories. We don't see that. He's not here. Instead, we see the tower of which he came from. So this is quite interesting on what's going to happen. This might be a completely separate story, and after 10, rifts essentially, or 10 tomes, he is now gone, and this is a new chapter of something else after the 10. Or this could lead to our bigger theory that he could potentially come as a new killer, or something revolving around the new killer. Regardless, they are saying that Devotion is going to be coming out as Tome 11. This is going to be pretty cool, and the caption was, "Even the brightest hope can be shrouded by doubt's shadow." Tome 11 Devotion coming soon. So quite interesting stuff. I'm assuming that this is going to be coming out next week. Normally they wouldn't tease these things quite early, and we thought it was going to be last week Tuesday, or yesterday Tuesday I should say, so it's probably going to be coming out next week Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. The next bit of information is that Dead by Daylight tweeted out about skill-based matchmaking and their learnings. This one is quite interesting because skill-based matchmaking has been a topic of debate for DBD players and the community for a very, very, very long time. We talked about if it's good for the game, is this what is killing the game, etc., what changes they need to make, and it looks like we're finally getting some good answers and transparency from the dev team about this. So they tweeted out 4 images and they said read more. We're gonna take a look at the 4 images first, and then we're gonna go ahead and read everything. I didn't read everything yet, so I'm not too sure, but the general consensus is that this is good feedback. So here is what they said were part of the learnings. They said there is a connection between the strictness of the matchmaking and the quality of the matches, but looking at other factors help us understand player expectations. Then they said, when testing for stricter matchmaking conditions, high skill players consistently ended in tough matches that offered little variety. When testing for looser matchmaking conditions, lower mid-tier skill players struggled when they were matched against more skilled opponents. And then they said the next step is to isolate these two groups from each other to keep the players in similar level together. Expand the pool of players in high skill matches to allow for more variety of opponents. Remove grades from the post-match screen. That last bit of information is beautiful, by the way. Removing grades. The amount of confusion that I get every single time that I'm on stream or I'm on YouTube and people are like, why am I bronze and I'm getting iridescent, etc. Grades do not determine your skill level, they just determine how much you play the game, and just because you are ranked with somebody that is iridescent doesn't mean that they're on the same skill level as you. They could just be playing the game quite a lot, and maybe you didn't play at all, but you guys are still at the same skill level. There's people that play the game constantly that are not very good at the game, and there's people that don't play the game whatsoever, and they're still good. Think about if Otz took a 1-year break, came back to DBD, and you've been playing your heart out for the past 30 days, and you just picked up the game. Of course, you're going to be in gold or iridescent because you've been playing for the past 30 days, but you're playing against Otz. The man has 2 billion hours in the game. He's going to absolutely destroy you. So grades do not equal skill whatsoever, and I'm so thankful that they're removing this so we can avoid so much confusion. Let's go ahead and actually read the entire post now about what's going to be happening with this and how exactly this is going to be working. I, again, have not read this, so let's go ahead and take a look. They said, over the past few weeks, we've run a series of short matchmaking tests based on various feedback we received. These range from making the matchmaker faster, stricter, various conditions between, and yes, even disabling skill-based matchmaking and averting the old grade-based matchmaking. I figure they did that. We want to start by thanking everyone who wanted to share their thoughts on each ends, and then they continue going on about that. So, let's talk about the variables. They said, we have a bunch of settings which we can tweak behind the scenes. Here's a quick rundown on the ones we've changed during the test. The first is a maximum range. When you search for a match, we try to find other players who are close to your rating within 50 points. If you aren't able to do so, the search gradually expands until we're able to find a match. By default, this is set to 500 points away from your own rating. This is so you're guaranteed to get a match after waiting a while, though it may not be the fairest. The second is expansion time. This is how long it takes to reach the maximum range. By default, this is set to 5 minutes. Then we have a few switches we can toggle. These are bidirectional matchmaking. Bidirectional matchmaking requires both players to have expand enough to encompass each other for them to be pulled into the same match. By default, this is off. If this sounds confusing, don't worry, it's complicated. Here is a little chart to clear it up. And they basically showed that the two players need to essentially reach each other's range before they can get into each other's matches, and that's essentially how it's been working. It said each player's actual rating is shown in the red and their current matchmaking search is shown in the blue. In example 1, player's A search has expanded to cover player B. Player B has not yet expanded to cover player A, so they won't be matched together. In example 2, both players have expanded enough to cover each other, so they are now matched together. When we use the default matchmaking, both examples would be eligible for a match. Grade visibility. This one's nice and simple. We switch off the grades in post-game match. Since they typically aren't used for matchmaking, this doesn't actually have an effect, but we were curious to see how people would feel about it and how it affects their perception of matchmaking, and thank God they took it off. They then said grade-based matchmaking. We can switch off skill-based matchmaking entirely and instead use grades for matchmaking. For folks who just joined us recently, this is roughly how the matchmaking worked before the introduction of skill-based matchmaking. They then went ahead and told us about every single test that happened every single day. So if you guys recall all of the different days and you took notes, you can correlate this back to how it felt. So this is pretty crazy. This just shows that the old matchmaking really wasn't cutting it out, even though we think it was and it felt better. The people on the lower ends of the spectrum and the higher ends of the spectrum, which we oftentimes forget, had some really rough matches. Like the good killers dominated, the bad killers didn't, and it was something. They then went on through a lot of different texts, and they basically said this test was very polarizing, but interestingly, we started to see more positive feedback when we started showing grades again. This indicates that there's definitely a strong connection between seeing the grades in the post-match screen and the sentiment about a match. So that is pretty interesting. You guys can read the whole thing yourselves. I won't bore you with all of it, but this is what they've learned. They said that these tests overall highlighted two distinct groups: high skill players who want more variety in their matches, which is true because a lot of people that are playing at the higher level are tired of seeing like the same killers, the same perks, the same things every single time, because then it becomes boring, but you're still at a high skill level, so you don't want to play against complete newbies. And then they said lower mid-scale players who understandably don't want to get destroyed by high-skill players. So these are the people that are casuals, that are just trying to have fun, enjoy themselves, and, you know, just hop into a match of DBD and not have to worry about facing 3 Blinkners or Spirit with Strider and a bunch of other crap, you know? So that is basically them testing and realizing what we kind of been saying for a very long time. And there's been so many times we said that they could split the queues and make this better, etc. And, well, we'll see what they're going to be doing now. Again, I haven't read this beforehand, so we will carry on. They said that the biggest takeaway here is that going too far either way is never a one-size-fits-all solution. What we'd often notice is how some players loved a particular test, but they were seeing more variety in their opponents, but at the same time, those same tests were also frustrating to a lot of people who are suddenly getting matched with people way better than them. Neither person is wrong in each scenario, each of them just expects something different from matchmaking. They also discovered that hiding the grades on the post-game stream definitely influences the feedback that they receive. We suspect this for 2 reasons. Long-time players who have also missed the matchmaking changes could still be thinking that the grades are used for matchmaking, and some players feel like grades are an indicator of skill in spite of not being used for matchmaking. Most importantly, however, we found that there is a lot of support for hiding grades, so this is something we'll be considering as a permanent change going forward. Thank you. Round of applause for that. That is absolutely fantastic. Please clear the air with that. So what happens from here? Let's find out. What are these changes? So they said, as mentioned in 2 learnings, we have 2 dominant groups: the high skill players who want more variety and the lower mid skill players who want even matches. They said in order to make both groups happy, we first need to isolate them from each other. To do this, we'll reduce the maximum expansion range. This will help keep players of similar skill levels together. The majority of the players fall in the middle of the spectrum, so there is still plenty of people to match with. Additionally, since it seems like the expansion is happening at a good rate, we'll be adjusting the expansion time proportionately. Next, we need to consider how this will affect the high skill group. Reducing the range would mean less variety. Fortunately, we have another variable to tweak that solves this issue perfectly. For the purposes of matchmaking, we have a cap for skill ratings. Although your rating can continue to climb beyond the cap, you'll be treated as if the cap for the purpose of matchmaking. This is in place to prevent the best players out there from climbing to a point where there's simply nobody to match with them. And that's when you find all the hackers. By lowering this cap, we're able to expand the pool of players in the high skill matches, leading to more variety in opponents you'll face. One match may be very close and competitive, but the next may be a little bit more laid back. This will ensure that the queue times don't grow longer at higher skill levels. Lastly, we'll be removing grades from the post-match screen. When we originally hid grades during the test, we saw a lot of people asking for this to be made permanent. Additionally, longtime players who have missed the news and think that the grades are still being used for matchmaking, leading them to feel that the match was less fair than it actually was. These combined with a generally more positive feedback during the test while they were disabled were enough for us to reason us to disable them in the foreseeable future. For the future, we're still hard to work to implementing various improvements to the matchmaking testing. These include making survivor rating team-based rather than personal, and improvements to backfilling lobbies to prevent players from outside the acceptable range to be pulled in. These improvements will take longer to implement, but just assured, work is already underway on them. You can find a full list of changes we're going to do in our January developer update. So there we go. Wow, that was a mouthful to read. Matchmaking is basically getting some changes, so we've seen exactly what they do, and honestly, the changes sound pretty good. I'm not even just saying that to say that. We are going to be getting some good changes for the higher skilled players and for the more newer players coming into the game that can actually lead to some good matchmaking. We won't have excessively long queues, especially for the people on the very low end of the spectrum or the high end of the spectrum, and hopefully some more fairer matches and some variety in them, you know, getting players that are really good to still be matched with decently well players and not the newbies, and still getting the more laid back people just to get some more laid back games. It sounds good on paper, so we have to see how they execute this, and whenever that happens, we can give our full feedback. But I'm happy that they collected this information, they listened to the community, and now they have solid evidence to back up what we've been saying, so they can move on forward with this information. So round of applause to them, and hopefully they can execute this well. Alrighty, that was a long, big section. It's time to talk a little bit more about the other news. There's still some more news. So today is actually your last chance to grab the collector's edition of the DBD board game. The Kickstarter itself ends on April 21st, so if you didn't get a chance to do this, now is your literal last time to do it. If you are planning on doing it, today is the last day that you can do it, and if you don't do it today, then you probably won't be getting it. Not to mention, there is a promo code. It's called DBD Board Game. You'll also be getting a promo. Not to mention, there is a promo code called DBD the Board Game, so make sure you guys enter that as well. Carrying on forward, we got the Shrine of Secrets for you guys. The first perk in there is Fire Up. The next one is Head On. The next one is Rancor. And the final one is Lucky Break. So those are some interesting perks. We didn't forget to do them. But I'm pretty sure that's all the information we got for you guys today. So we got obviously the new matchmaking information, that we got all those test results, we got the devotion banner, we got the game basically coming on out, the board game that is. I played it, by the way, super fun. We have the Shrine of Secrets, and there you go, my friends. That is pretty much all of the information that we have for you guys today. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, leave a like down below. It was a handful to read, so I do apologize. I'm still a little bit under the weather and obviously not home right now, but we will be very soon. Thank you guys for all the love and the support. As always, I'm the king. I tip my crown to you guys. We'll see you in the fall.